They tried to silence the boy, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. At a glittering charity gala, a millionaire mocked a poor black boy and dared him to heal me for $1,000,000. Everyone laughed, until the boy touched his leg and something impossible happened. What followed shattered egos, exposed a buried truth, and proved that sometimes the smallest hands carry the greatest power. Rain slid down the glass walls of the Riverside Grand Hotel like thin silver threads, catching the reflection of gold lights strung across the courtyard. Inside, violins hummed beneath the low roar of conversations, voices smooth, confident, polished the way money often sounded. Laughter rose in bursts, floating through the revolving doors every time a guest in evening wear stepped out for a breath of air. Jalen Brooks stood barefoot under the awning near the service entrance, hugging his elbows against the cold. 14, narrow shoulders, jeans too short at the ankles, hoodie damp at the cuffs. Rain had splashed dirt onto his feet, and he kept curling his toes against the concrete as if trying to hide them. He wasn't supposed to be here, not anywhere close to a place where plates cost more than a month of rent. He just hoped someone might hand him leftovers, something he could take back to his little sister waiting in the darkened trailer 3 blocks away. A waiter in a crisp vest stepped out with a tray of empty glasses. He spotted Jalen and stiffened. "Hey, this area's for staff only. Move along, kid." Jalen dipped his head. "Sorry, sir. I'm not bothering anyone. I was hoping for maybe some bread or—" "No." The waiter didn't let him finish. He angled his body as if shielding the hotel from the sight of him. "You can't stay here." Behind the waiter, 2 women in long dresses passed by, glancing at Jalen the way people look at gum stuck to a sidewalk, quick enough to avoid guilt, long enough to mark disgust. One whispered something behind her hand. The other laughed under her breath. Jalen felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a familiar sting he'd learned to swallow. Being invisible was easier. Being noticed always hurt. He stepped back into the darkest corner beside the service door, letting the shadows cover him. He knew every crack in this alley, the smell of trash bins, the hum of the hotel's cooling units, the puddle near the drain that never dried. He'd eaten here before when kind waiters slipped him scraps. Some nights he'd pretended the glow from the ballroom windows was warm enough to reach him, but tonight felt different. The air buzzed louder. There was movement inside. Grand, powerful, important. Jalen peeked through the narrow opening where the door hadn't shut all the way. He could see silhouettes gliding past the linen-draped tables, cuffs shining, shoes polished better than mirrors. And though no one saw him, Jalen watched them all with a quiet intensity. The way that woman's left hip dipped each step. The man whose shoulder rounded too far forward from years hunched at a desk. The guest rubbing the base of his neck to soothe a nerve pinched from a misaligned spine. The human body spoke to him, through posture, breath, movement. His grandmother had taught him when he was small enough to fit in her lap. "Bones talk," she'd whisper, guiding his tiny fingers along the ridges of her wrist. "Muscles remember, and pain always tells the truth." Jalen didn't mean to study people. It was automatic, like how some kids noticed sneakers or haircuts. He noticed imbalance, strain, hidden hurts no one else cared to see. A gust of wind swept Rain sideways, speckling his hoodie. He shivered and pressed closer to the wall. Maybe he should leave. Maybe tonight wasn't the night someone would show him kindness. Then the music stopped inside. The crowd hushed, the way oceans quiet themselves before a storm. Heads turned toward the entrance. A ripple of whispers moved like a wave. Someone important had arrived. Jalen leaned just enough to see the outline of a wheelchair being rolled through the crystal-lit foyer. A figure sat tall in it, broad-shouldered, commanding attention without trying. But he wasn't the reason Jalen's breath caught. It was the way his left foot dragged inward, the way his right shoulder sat too high, The way his spine curved, not from injury alone but from fear, from years of a body protecting itself the wrong way. Jalen's eyes narrowed with instinctive focus, all humiliation momentarily forgotten. Something about that man. Something was wrong that shouldn't have been. Something every doctor had missed. He didn't know yet that this single observation, one flicker of understanding, was about to pull him from the shadows and into a story he was never meant to enter. He didn't know that tonight. He would touch a life that belonged to a world far above his own. He only knew one thing, whispered like a warning at the back of his mind. This is the kind of hurt that doesn't stay quiet forever. And before the rain stopped falling, Jalen Brooks would be right in the center of it. Inside the Riverside Grand Hotel, the lights dimmed just enough to shift the room's attention. Conversations softened, laughter faded, and even the string quartet hesitated mid-bow as the ballroom doors opened wide. A cold breath of rain-soaked air drifted in, followed by the low roll of wheels across polished marble. Grant Whitford entered like a man used to rooms parting for him, not because he commanded them, but because he'd once ruled them. He sat in a sleek black wheelchair now, hands steady on the rims, chin lifted as though daring anyone to pity him. A scar peeked just above the collar of his tailored jacket, disappearing beneath the fabric like a secret he refused to talk about. He waved off the attendant who tried to guide him. "Relax, I can roll myself. Haven't lost my arms yet," he quipped loud enough for half the room to hear. Nervous laughter scattered. Thin, hesitant. The kind of sound people make when they're not sure if something is funny or tragic. Jalen watched from the crack of the service door, his breath fogging lightly in the cool air. Grant looked every bit the millionaire the city papers praised. Steel gray hair slicked back with precision, jawline sharp as a chiseled statue, shoulders still broad from a life of skiing, climbing, running, before the accident that took it all. He didn't look defeated. If anything, he looked irritated that his own body dared to inconvenience him. "Guess the $12 million I spent on doctors didn't come with a warranty," Grant announced, tapping his useless left foot with the edge of his palm. "Still won't move on command, but it does make a great party trick. I get to remind everyone why they're donating tonight." This time the crowd laughed louder, grateful for permission. But Jalen wasn't looking at Grant's smile. He was watching the tiny tremor in the man's left hand, the way his right shoulder lifted too high, compensating for something deeper. The way his hip rotated inward, not from paralysis alone but from years of guarding pain. Patterns, protective instincts. A body screaming through subtle signals that most people never learn to read. To Jalen, it was as clear as ink across a white page. "That man's hurting wrong," he whispered to himself. Someone brushed past him and he startled, pressing flat against the wall. A pair of chefs carried trays stacked with lamb chops and roasted vegetables worth more than everything in Jalen's kitchen. The smell made his stomach twist. He'd been saving bread for his sister Maya, who'd gone to sleep hungry twice this week. He should go home. He knew that. But something about that man in the wheelchair kept pulling his eyes back. Grant steered himself toward the center of the ballroom, where guests clustered like bright birds shimmering under chandeliers. His wife, Evelyn Whitford, glided at his side in a silver gown that sparkled under every beam of light. Her beauty was icy, sculpted, disciplined, the kind that belonged in magazines beside waterfront mansions. She smiled at guests, but her hand never left Grant's shoulder, guiding him gently, sometimes too gently, as if correcting him without making it look like correction. Jalen saw the tightness in her grip, the tension in her jaw, the way she subtly angled his wheelchair to face cameras. A man in a burgundy blazer leaned forward to greet him. "Grant, glad you made it. How are you holding up?" "Fantastic," Grant replied, smirking. "Nothing says fun night like rolling in on 4 wheels instead of 2 legs." Uneasy laughter again. Then Grant caught sight of himself reflected in the tall mirror near the dessert table. For a moment, just long enough for Jalen to catch it, his smirk faltered, his eyes hardened, his posture tensed. Pain. Not just physical. Something older. Something prideful. Jalen recognized that kind of hurt too. He'd seen it in grown men at the shelter. Men who pretended they didn't care while their worlds collapsed quietly inside them. A waiter brushed past and the service door swung open wider, revealing Jalen to the ballroom for half a second. He ducked back, but not fast enough. One of the donors frowned, whispering to her husband, "Did you see that boy? Barefoot. They should really move him along." Heat burned Jalen's ears. He wasn't trespassing. He wasn't stealing. He just needed something. Anything. He stepped farther into the shadows, hugging himself tighter. Inside, the host lifted a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for Mr. Whitford, our top donor tonight." Cheers rose. Glasses clinked. Grant gave a modest half-wave, though his jaw tightened again at the mention of top donor, as if the title felt heavier than flattering. Then, as Grant rolled forward to speak, his left leg twitched, barely noticeable. A quarter inch, maybe less. But Jalen saw it. His eyes widened. Bodies don't lie. And Grant's body was screaming for help in ways no one else noticed. Jalen felt his heart thud once, hard. Something inside him, a pull, a nudge, an instinct, told him that whatever was wrong with this man didn't have to stay wrong. Not forever. Not if someone understood the pattern hidden beneath the pain. But he was just a boy in a rainy alley. Just a kid no one believed. Just a pair of bare feet outside a world built on polished glass and locked doors. Still, something whispered in his bones. "You've seen this before. You know what this is." He swallowed hard. If he walked away now, nothing would change. Not for Grant, not for Maya, not for the legacy his grandmother left behind, the gift she told him to protect, even when nobody listened. Jalen tightened his hoodie around his thin frame. His pulse beat like distant thunder. He didn't know that within minutes, he and Grant Whitford would stand face to face. He didn't know the crowd would turn on him, or that the entire room would watch him like a spectacle. He didn't know that a single careless joke about $1 million would shift the course of both their lives. He only knew one thing. The hurt inside that ballroom was getting louder, and it was calling his name. Jalen didn't mean to step forward. His body just moved, pulled by something deeper than courage or fear. Maybe instinct. Maybe fate. Maybe the same quiet voice his grandmother used to speak with when she said, "When someone's in pain, you'll feel it before they do." He slipped a little closer to the doorway, just enough to see the room without being swallowed by it. Grant Whitford had taken center stage now, raising his glass for a toast he didn't seem fully present for. His smile was wide, but the muscles around his mouth strained. His shoulders held tension the way locked doors hold secrets. And beneath the linen table, his left foot twitched in that same involuntary pattern that made Jalen's breath catch. It wasn't random. It was the body knocking. Grant took a sip of whiskey and scanned the room with an expression that mixed boredom and exhaustion, until his gaze drifted toward the service entrance, toward the boy in the shadows. A crease formed between his eyebrows. He leaned slightly forward, squinting as if trying to place the shape he'd glimpsed. Jalen froze. A guest beside Grant glanced over, clearly seeing Jalen too. "Is that a new busboy? Someone should tell management." Evelyn Whitford followed their eyes. Her face sharpened. "Security should have cleared this area." Grant raised a hand, signaling her to wait. Something about the hunched figure in the corner, small, barefoot, clothes damp from the rain, caught his curiosity. And Grant's curiosity was a force even wealth couldn't restrain. "Hey, kid!" he called out, voice booming through the ballroom. The room went quiet enough for the air to crackle. Jalen's heart lurched. He stepped half a foot back, but the door had already been pushed wider by a passing server, revealing him fully, awkward, skinny, clutching the damp fabric of his hoodie. Grant chuckled. You hiding, or you working? A couple guests tittered. Someone whispered, he looks homeless. Grant wheeled closer, his expression somewhere between amused and intrigued. Come on out. Let's see you. Jalen swallowed. He wanted to run, God, he wanted to, but every step backward felt like betrayal, of himself, of what he knew, of what his grandmother taught him. So instead, he stepped through the doorway and into the bright light of the ballroom, squinting as dozens of eyes locked onto him. Name? Grant asked. Jalen, he murmured. Jalen what? Jalen Brooks. Grant lifted a brow. How old are you? 14. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman gasped softly, as if poverty at 14 was shocking, but also confirmatory. Grant looked him over, the loose jeans, the rain-damp hoodie, the bare feet with dirt still clinging to the edges. You from around here? Yes, sir. Home nearby? Jalen hesitated. Kinda. That was enough for the entire room to fill in the blanks. Grant chuckled again, leaning back slightly in his wheelchair. You hungry, Jalen? Jalen didn't trust the question. He nodded anyway. We've got more food here than we can finish. Take a plate if you want. Grant gestured broadly, as though offering generosity, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, watched Jalen as though studying a puzzle piece that didn't belong. Jalen glanced around. No one looked happy about the offer. Some murmured, others frowned. But hunger clawed deep, and Jalen knew that he couldn't go back to the trailer empty-handed. He stepped toward the buffet. Grant stopped him. Hold up. His lips curled into a smirk. You were staring awfully hard back there. Something you want to say? Jalen's stomach dropped. No, sir. Oh, come on, Grant coaxed. You were looking at my legs like you knew something. A few guests snorted. Evelyn crossed her arms, unimpressed. Jalen's voice trembled. I didn't mean anything. Sure you did. Grant tapped his rigid left leg. You look like you've got opinions. Another wave of laughter. Jalen felt the old humiliation building under his ribs. He could walk away. He should walk away. But Grant's foot twitched again, and that quiet voice inside him spoke like a warning. Your leg, Jalen said softly. It hurts in the wrong place. The room froze. Grant's smile cooled. Is that so? Your doctors, they're treating the injury, but missing what your body's doing around it. The ballroom filled with murmurs, confused, amused, judgmental. Evelyn uttered a sharp, enough of this! But Grant lifted a hand again. His ego had been poked, and everyone could feel it. Tell me, Jalen, what exactly is my body doing? Jalen shifted on his bare feet. He shouldn't speak. He knew that. But truth pressed against his tongue. Your shoulder sits too high because your back is guarding the old injury. Your hips rotated inward to protect it. That's why your foot turns like that. It's not paralysis alone, it's fear. A silence so heavy it might have cracked the chandeliers above them dropped into the room. Then someone laughed, loud, sharp, dismissive. Grant leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You think you understand something my $12 million medical team doesn't? Jalen didn't answer. Grant laughed, a booming, theatrical sound dripping with mockery. Kid, you must be bold or crazy. He rolled toward Jalen, stopping only inches away. Well then, he said, voice playful but dangerous. If you're so sure my doctors are wrong, why don't you fix me? Jalen's chest tightened. Grant spread his arms. Right here, right now. If you can get my leg to move, I'll give you $1 million. Gasps erupted. Grant, Evelyn hissed. It's a joke, someone whispered. Cruel, another murmured. Jalen's mouth went dry. He shook his head. I can't. What's wrong? Grant taunted. Not as smart as you sounded a second ago? The humiliation hit like a slap. Heat climbed Jalen's neck. The room felt too bright, too loud, too sharp. He could walk away, pretend none of this was happening, or he could speak the truth his grandmother raised him on. Jalen lifted his eyes, voice barely above a whisper. You're hurting in the wrong place, Mr. Whitford. And if you let me, I can show you. The ballroom went silent. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. Someone dropped a fork. It clattered across the table like a gunshot. Grant stared at him, long, assessing. Then a slow smile spread across his face, amused and taunting. Well then, he said, let's see this miracle you think you've got. Jalen's stomach knotted. He didn't know yet that stepping forward would change everything, or that humiliation tonight would become the very spark that set his entire world on fire. Jalen felt the ballroom tilt, as if the chandeliers above had leaned in to watch. Grant Whitford rolled back a few inches to give the boy space, creating a circle of expectation that pressed on Jalen's shoulders like heavy hands. 100 faces turned toward him, curious, entertained, skeptical. The rain outside had softened, but inside a storm brewed in silence. Go on then, Grant said, tapping his useless left foot with the edge of his palm. Here's your chance to prove you know more than my medical team. The mocking tone echoed off marble floors. Jalen's breath came shallow. He didn't belong here. He knew that. He wasn't dressed for a night like this. He wasn't invited. He wasn't supposed to touch someone so important, so wealthy, so unreachable. Every rule of society lined up against him. But the hurt in Grant's body called louder than the fear in Jalen's chest. He stepped forward. Gasps flickered through the crowd. Even the musicians set down their bows, sensing that whatever was happening didn't require a soundtrack. It was becoming one. A security guard moved in. Sir, do you want us to stop him? Grant lifted a finger. No, this should be good. The guard stepped back, though his eyes stayed fixed on Jalen with a warning that needed no words. Jalen knelt beside the wheelchair. His bare knees touched the cold marble, and a chill shot up his legs. He wasn't shaking from the cold, though. He was shaking from the weight of every person watching, judging, hoping he failed. Grant leaned back in his chair, playing to the crowd. Careful, folks. We may be witnessing the birth of a medical prodigy. Laughter bubbled up again, but thinner now, uneasy. Something in the room had shifted. The boy wasn't running away. He wasn't intimidated into silence. That alone unsettled them. Jalen looked up at Grant. Can I touch your leg, sir? For $1 million? Grant scoffed. Touch whatever you need. That drew the loudest laughter yet. Jalen reached forward. He didn't see cameras. He didn't see the glittering gowns or the mocking faces. He didn't see Evelyn Whitford glaring at him like he was a stain on an heirloom carpet. He saw only the tension in Grant's hip, drawn tight like a coiled rope pulled for too many years. His fingertips rested lightly on the man's ankle first. The room fell silent so fast, the sound pulsed in Jalen's ears like distant thunder. Grant's suit was expensive, the leather of his shoes smooth and cold. But beneath that, Jalen felt something familiar. Resistance, confusion, a body trying to remember what it once knew. He moved higher, to the calf, the knee, then the joint where the hip locked. He closed his eyes, tuning out the world until all that remained was the rhythm of bone and muscle beneath his palms. A voice cut through the silence sharply. Get your hands off him! It was Evelyn Whitford, stepping forward with rigid fury. Grant held up a hand, but didn't take his eyes off Jalen. The boy's focus was laser-sharp, his breathing steadying as instinct took over. Every lesson his grandmother whispered in a dimly lit kitchen. Every practice on neighbors who couldn't afford doctors. Every memory of his father doing the same before the world convinced him he had no right to heal. "Stay still," Jalen murmured. Grant raised a brow. "Why? Something magical about to happen?" He meant it as a joke, but the next moment made the entire room forget how to breathe. Jalen pressed his thumb gently into the deep muscle near Grant's hip. One precise point, the kind only someone who understood patterns would ever think to touch. A shift rippled like a tiny wave through Grant's leg, a release so subtle and yet so immediate that Jalen felt it before Grant realized it. Then, Grant inhaled sharply. His foot moved, just a twitch at first, small, almost shy, then again, a fuller motion, as if his toes were remembering they belonged to him. His ankle flexed barely an inch, but enough that every person in the room saw it. A woman dropped her champagne glass. Someone whispered, "No way, no way." Grant's eyes flew open. "What? What did you—" But he didn't finish. Because the moment hope surfaced, fear chased it. Evelyn lunged forward. "Security! He's hurting him!" The guard rushed in. Someone shouted, "Get that boy away!" Another yelled, "He can't touch a disabled man like that." In seconds, the ballroom erupted. Voices overlapping, hands reaching for Jalen, accusations slicing through the air. But over all the panic, Jalen heard one thing: Grant's breath, unsteady, shaken. Not from pain, from possibility. Jalen stood too quickly, stumbling back as the guard grabbed his arm with more force than needed. He didn't fight. He knew better. He'd been handled like this before. Evelyn clutched her husband's wheelchair. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Grant, say something." Grant didn't answer. His eyes were still glued to his foot, the foot that had obeyed him for the first time in 4 long, bitter years. The room spun, in chaos, but Jalen only heard his own heartbeat, heavy as footsteps in an empty hall. He whispered one last sentence toward Grant, barely audible under the shouting. "Your body's trying to heal. You just have to listen." Then the guard pulled him away, and that was when the screaming truly began. Not from Jalen, not from Evelyn, but from everyone else. Because Grant Whitford's foot moved again, on its own, deliberate this time, and no one in that glittering ballroom could deny what they had seen. For a fraction of a second, the entire room stood suspended in something close to awe. Grant Whitford's toes curled, slow, purposeful, unmistakably alive. His ankle flexed gently, as if awakening from a long sleep. The limb everyone believed to be permanently silent had spoken again. But wonder is a fragile thing, especially in rooms built on reputation and ego. Before awe could settle, fear slid in, and then panic. "He hurt him!" someone shouted. "No, I saw the leg move." "That boy did something dangerous." "Call security! Call the police!" The voices crashed into one another until they dissolved into chaotic noise. Cell phones rose like a sudden field of glowing stars as guests recorded the unfolding scene. The guard gripping Jalen's arm tightened his hold, pulling him backward so roughly that his bare heel squeaked across the marble. "Stop!" Jalen gasped. "I didn't hurt anyone." But no one cared about his words, not when fear felt more comforting than truth. Evelyn Whitford crouched beside her husband, hands trembling as she searched his face. "Grant, darling, talk to me. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Do you feel pain? Tell them he attacked you." Grant didn't answer. His breath stuttered in uneven bursts as his eyes remained fixed. No, glued to his foot. The tremor in his hand wasn't fear, nor pain, nor shock. It was wonder. A dangerous, quiet wonder that threatened everything he had believed for 4 long years. The security guard yanked Jalen's other arm, turning him away from the crowd. "You're done," he said. "You can't go around touching people like that." Jalen's heart pounded. He twisted just enough to look back at Grant. "Sir, I didn't harm you. You know I didn't." Grant blinked slowly, as if returning from a place inside himself he didn't know existed. His lips parted, maybe to speak, maybe to deny, maybe to question his own eyes. But before anything could form, a guest stepped between them, blocking the view. "That child assaulted him," the woman cried, pointing at Jalen like he were a stain on her carpet. "Arrest him before he hurts someone else." Another guest chimed in. "Kids like that will do anything for attention. I knew something was wrong the second I saw him." Kids like that. The words hit Jalen harder than the guard's hands ever could. His breath thinned. His vision pulsed at the edges. Memories flashed, being followed in a store by security even though he hadn't touched anything. Teachers calling him distracted when he couldn't afford eyeglasses. Neighbors crossing the street when he walked home at night. Now he was here, being dragged across marble floors in front of people who didn't know him but had already decided who he was. The boy in the shadows, the barefoot child, the suspect. "Let me go!" Jalen tugged, panic rising like a tide. "I'm telling the truth. His leg moved because it wanted to. I didn't—" "Be quiet," the guard snapped, lifting him off his feet for a second. "Stay still, or I'll have to restrain you." That word, restrain, felt like a cold hand around his throat. A sudden voice sliced through the noise. "Everyone calm down!" It was the event host, but his voice trembled as he spoke, torn between keeping peace and keeping donors from fleeing. The quartet had abandoned their instruments. Waiters stood frozen. Even the ceiling lights flickered as though uncertain which emotion to illuminate. "He assaulted the guest of honor," someone shouted. "He helped him," another argued. "That wasn't help. Call 911. The guard pulled Jalen toward the side exit, fingers tightening like metal cuffs. "We're waiting for police," he muttered. Jalen shook his head, desperation overtaking fear. "Please, I didn't do anything wrong. I can explain." "You touched a disabled man without permission." "He gave permission," Jalen cried, voice cracking. "He told me to." "That was a joke," a man scoffed. "You took advantage." "No!" Jalen shouted, louder than he meant to. "I was trying to help." The room exploded again. "Help? Who does he think he is? He's lying. Get him out of here!" But beneath the rising hysteria, beneath the rumbling anger, beneath the confusion, Jalen heard something else. Grant's voice, small, quiet, cracked. "My foot!" No one noticed except Jalen. It moved again. But any hope the whisper carried was smothered instantly by Evelyn's panicked cry. "He needs a doctor! Someone get Dr. Keaton on the phone now!" As the guard dragged Jalen to the exit, more phones turned on him, filming the scene from every angle. He saw his reflection in a gilded mirror, thin, frightened, outnumbered, a boy swallowed by a world that didn't intend to make space for him. A world that never believed him. "Let me go," he whispered again, but it hollowed out under the weight of the ballroom's noise. Pushing open the door into the rain, the guard pulled him into the wet night air just as blue and red lights began flashing down the block. Police cars arrived fast, too fast, as if the city had been waiting for an excuse to respond. Jalen blinked up at the blur of lights, his breath visible in the cold, his chest hollowed with dread. They weren't here to hear him. They were here to process him. Behind him, the ballroom doors swung shut, sealing in the warmth, the wealth, and the room full of people who had chosen fear over truth. But somewhere inside that room was a man whose world had just shifted, a man who had felt hope in a part of his body he thought belonged to the past, a man who might have said something, might have done something, if fear and pride hadn't choked his voice before it could rise. The rain thickened. The police approached. The guard kept his grip tight. And Jalen Brooks, 14 years old, barefoot and drenched, realized something with a clarity so sharp it stung. Tonight, helping someone had made him the villain. And tomorrow, the entire city would hear that version first. The rain fell harder as the police cars rolled up. windshield wipers slashing through the downpour. Blue and red lights pulsed against the hotel's shimmering glass, like warnings from another world. Officers stepped out, jackets darkening in the rain, hands resting calmly but deliberately on their belts. Jalen stood on the slick pavement, shivering beneath the cold and the stares. "He's the one," the security guard said, tightening his grip on Jalen's arm. "Touched Mr. Whitford without authorization. Caused a scene. Guests felt threatened." Threatened. That word landed like a stone in Jalen's stomach. One officer knelt a little to meet his eyes. He wasn't unkind, just steady in the way adults get when they've already decided the ending of a story. "Son, we just need to ask you a few questions." "I didn't hurt him," Jalen whispered, voice trembling. "His leg. It moved." The officer exchanged a look with his partner. Not disbelief, not belief, just the tired neutrality of someone who heard too many impossible things to care either way. "Let's go somewhere dry," the partner said. But before they could guide him away, a shout burst from the ballroom doors. "Wait!" Dozens of guests spilled outside, umbrellas opening like blooming flowers. Phones hovered. The rain caught the glow from their screens, turning droplets into tiny sparks. At the center of the rushing crowd was Evelyn Whitford, pushing her husband's wheelchair with frantic urgency. "Officers," she called. "My husband needs medical attention. That boy may have caused complications." Her voice cracked on the last word, sharpened by panic, or something that looked like it. Grant sat rigid in his chair, eyes dazed. Not from fear, Jalen thought, but from trying to make sense of what he had felt. The movement. The impossible. He lifted his head slightly toward Jalen, but before any connection could spark between them, Evelyn stepped in front of his line of sight. "Please," she urged the officers, "take that child away from here." Child. That should have sounded protective, but in her voice it sounded like a warning label. The officers nodded and ushered Jalen into the back of the cruiser. The door shut with a heavy thud, sealing him away from voices, umbrellas, and the warmth of light shining from the hotel windows. The city blurred past as they drove. Neon signs smeared across the rain-soaked windshield. Streetlights flickered gold against puddles, twisting their reflections into fragile ribbons. Inside the car, everything was quiet, except for the occasional radio bleeps. "You okay back there?" the younger officer asked gently. Jalen nodded, though his chest felt squeezed tight. Words gathered in his throat but didn't come out. He watched the hotel fade behind them until it became nothing more than a smear of yellow in the distance. "They're wrong," he wanted to say. "You saw his foot move. It wasn't just me. Somebody must have seen." But fear swallowed every sentence. They arrived not at a jail, but a youth intake center, a plain brick building with buzzing fluorescent lights and a smell like wet paper and disinfectant. The officers walked him inside, speaking to staff with routine professionalism. "This is temporary until we get statements sorted. Parents or guardian?" Jalen stared at the tile floor. "None." A pause. A long one. Paperwork shuffled. A phone rang. A social worker stepped forward, her expression tired in a soft way. "Come with me, sweetheart," she said. "We'll get you settled for the night." Jalen followed, shoes squeaking softly on the floor. Except he had no shoes, only wet feet leaving faint prints behind him. He couldn't stop replaying the ballroom in his mind. The laughter, the accusations, the moment Grant's foot had moved beneath his touch. It wasn't my imagination. It couldn't have been. He lay on the thin cot the staff assigned him. Blanket scratchy, pillow too flat, air conditioning humming above his head. The ceiling tiles formed a broken checkerboard he couldn't stop staring at. Hours dragged. Across the room, other kids slept or pretended to. He heard soft breathing, a cough, distant footsteps of workers doing rounds. His thoughts circled like trapped birds. If only Grant had said something. If only he'd spoken one word, helped. But maybe asking a powerful man to speak truth in front of 100 witnesses was too big an ask. Maybe that was naive. Jalen rolled over, gripping the blanket. He felt the sting of embarrassment again. Bare feet on marble floors, cameras pointed at him, adults laughing as though he had dared to pretend to be something he wasn't. He wished he could make himself small enough to disappear between the tiles. But somewhere in the city, another man wasn't sleeping either. Inside the Whitford penthouse, Grant was awake long past midnight. He had dismissed the medical team Evelyn summoned. He had waved off her questions, ignored the trembling in her voice, the sharp fear in her eyes. Now he sat alone in his dimly lit study, lamps casting warm gold circles across books, awards, framed photos of mountains he used to climb. Outside, the skyline glowed against thinning rain. His left leg rested on a cushioned support. He stared at it like it was a ghost. Then, quietly, like asking a question no one else could hear, he told it. Move. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, his toes twitched, just enough to draw a choked breath from his chest. Grant leaned forward, hand shaking as he reached down to touch the proof of something he couldn't explain. Something that terrified him more than it thrilled him. Because if the boy was right, if he had helped him, if the entire room had gotten it wrong, then the lie of tonight would grow teeth, and it would find him. His thumb brushed along his ankle. His leg spasmed again, this time responding more willingly than before. Grant shut his eyes, overwhelmed. Tomorrow, Evelyn would want answers. Tomorrow, his lawyers would demand control. Tomorrow, the city would hear their version of events first. But tonight, alone in a room high above a sleeping city, with the storm fading to a gentle tap against the windows, Grant Whitford whispered the only truth he had left inside him. That boy, he didn't hurt me. He swallowed hard, fear knotting tight in his throat. He helped me. But truth spoken alone carried no power. Not yet. And miles away in a youth center cot, Jalen Brooks, barefoot, shivering, exhausted, had no idea his story wasn't done. It was just beginning. Morning crept into the intake center through narrow windows, casting weak stripes of gray across the floor. The overnight chill still clung to the air. Jalen lay awake long before the lights clicked on, staring at the steel frame of the bunk above him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ballroom again. The glittering chandeliers, the sharp laughter, the moment the guard's hand clamped on his arm. Most of all, he saw Grant's leg move. He sat up slowly, rubbing his hands together for warmth as footsteps approached. A staff member with kind but tired eyes appeared at his door. Jalen, you need to come with me. 2 officials need to speak with you. He nodded and followed her down a sterile hallway, each step echoing softly. He had expected police, maybe a lawyer. But in the small interview room, beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, sat 2 people in suits he'd never seen before. Grant Whitford's attorney and his longtime physician. The lawyer, a tall man with silver glasses and a tight smile, tapped a folder on the table. Jalen, we're here to help clear things up. His tone suggested the exact opposite. Beside him, Dr. Keaton, a man with a crisp white coat draped over his arm, even though they weren't in a hospital, watched Jalen with polite disinterest. Jalen sat down carefully. The lawyer leaned in, fingers steepled. Now, son, we understand you interacted with Mr. Whitford last night, and we understand how confusing that must have been. Jalen frowned. I wasn't confused. His leg. That's enough, Dr. Keaton interrupted gently, like soothing a fussy child. You attempted something without training. These things happen. Mr. Whitford is fragile. Any sudden movement he experienced was likely involuntary. Jalen shook his head. No, it wasn't. I felt That's precisely the kind of misunderstanding we're here to prevent, the lawyer said, smile tightening. You're young. People will be kinder to you if you don't claim you caused any medical change. It creates liability issues for everyone involved. Liability. Jalen didn't know the exact definition, but he felt the threat behind the word. The lawyer slid a form across the table. You just sign this statement saying you didn't perform any kind of intentional procedure, and we'll ensure this situation doesn't escalate. Jalen didn't touch the paper. I didn't hurt him. The lawyer exhaled through his nose. No one said you did, and said, but your claims on video about understanding his injury, those could be interpreted as impersonating a medical professional. I wasn't pretending, Jalen said, voice rising. I just saw what was wrong. My grandma taught me. Dr. Keaton stiffened, and the lawyer raised a warning hand. Son, people can misinterpret statements like that. You don't want this following you. Jalen lowered his eyes, heart pounding. I'm not signing something that isn't true. The smile vanished from the lawyer's face. Then this will be much harder for you than it needs to be. A soft knock broke the tension. The door opened, and a woman stepped inside, dark curls pulled back, raincoat still damp, press badge clipped to her collar. Renee Carter. Her sharp, alert gaze swept the room before settling on Jalen. I'm sorry, but this interview needs to pause. Legally. The lawyer stood up. And you are? Journalist. She showed her badge, confidence like armor. I have footage from last night that contradicts several claims already circulating, and someone needs to make sure this child isn't being cornered. Jalen blinked at her. He didn't know her, but her voice, firm, clear, felt like someone had finally stepped into his corner. The lawyer bristled. This is a private legal matter. You have no authority here. Renee crossed her arms. Neither does pressuring a minor to sign a legal document without representation. Silence tightened the air. The lawyer gathered his papers. We'll revisit this later, with the appropriate authorities. Dr. Keaton stood as well, pausing only long enough to give Jalen a thin smile. Take care of yourself, son, and try not to make things harder than they already are. They left the room quickly, like men hoping to outrun the truth. Renee closed the door behind them and turned to Jalen. Her expression softened immediately. Are you okay? Jalen shrugged, swallowing the lump forming in his throat. Nobody believes me. I saw the original video, she said, before it was edited and circulated. She pulled out her phone, showing a still frame, Grant's foot moving. Clearly. Unmistakably. Jalen felt air rush into his lungs like he'd been underwater until this moment. You're not crazy, Renee said, and you're not alone. He stared at the screen, whispering, He's getting better, isn't he? Renee hesitated. I think so, but his team? They don't want that story out. Why? He asked, voice cracking. Why wouldn't they want him to be better? She exhaled slowly. Because if you're right, it means they've been wrong. And powerful people don't like being exposed. Jalen leaned back, letting her words sink in. The weight of them settled like stones. Wrong. Exposed. Powerful people. He remembered the entire ballroom turning on him within seconds. The cameras. The accusations. The way adults didn't need evidence to decide what a barefoot black boy must have done. Renee crouched to meet his eyes. Listen to me, Jalen. What you did last night, it mattered. More than you think. And if they're trying this hard to silence you, it's because they're scared. He blinked. Scared of me? I'm nobody. No, she said gently. You're someone they can't control. A knock at the door interrupted them. This time it wasn't officials. It was a staff member with a clipboard. Jalen? The judge just scheduled your hearing. It'll be in 72 hours. His stomach dropped. A hearing? For what? For the incident last night, she said softly. They need to determine if charges will be filed. Charges. The word clung to him like cold air. As the worker stepped away, Jalen looked at Renee with widening eyes. I didn't hurt him. Why do they think I hurt him? Renee shook her head. The question isn't what they think. It's what they want people to think. Jalen's breath trembled. Somewhere across the city, Grant Whitford was standing quietly in front of a mirror, testing the leg that shouldn't move, but was. But truth without courage was silent. And Jalen was beginning to understand that the people in that ballroom weren't just afraid of what he'd done. They were afraid of what he knew, and afraid of what it would mean if he kept speaking. Morning broke over the city with a dull, washed-out gray, the kind that made everything feel heavier. Jalen sat in the back seat of a transport van, hands clasped in his lap, trying to quiet the tremble that kept running through his fingers. The youth center staff had insisted on accompanying him, saying he wasn't under arrest, just being transported for evaluation. But the inside of the van felt too close to handcuffs to make any difference. Rain streaked down the windows, turning buildings into blurry shapes. Every stoplight, every crosswalk, every familiar corner reminded him of home, of Maya waiting in their trailer, not knowing where her big brother had gone last night, or why he wasn't coming back yet. The county courthouse rose ahead, tall and solemn, with wide stone steps that seemed to swallow the people climbing them, the kind of place where words mattered less than who spoke them. Jalen felt his knees weaken as they guided him up the steps, each footstep echoing like a warning. Inside, everything smelled like polished floors and old paper. Lawyers walked by in quick strides, clutching folders tight to their chests. A bailiff announced cases, voice booming through the hallways. It felt like the walls themselves watched him, deciding what kind of boy he must be. A public defender met him near the benches, a man in his 40s with a kind face buried in a stack of disorganized papers. Jalen Brooks, he said, breathless. I'm Alan Pierce. I'll be representing you today. Jalen nodded, barely breathing. Pierce crouched to meet his eyes. I know this is scary, but we're not here for trial, okay? This is a preliminary hearing. The judge will look at the facts and decide whether your case moves forward. But I didn't do anything wrong, Jalen whispered. Pierce's expression softened. I believe you, but we have to deal with popular narratives, and last night's event, it stirred up a lot of opinions. Opinions. The word felt like a blade disguised as a feather. They entered the courtroom. Cold, high ceilings, rows of wooden benches, a seal of justice carved into the wall behind the judge's bench. And there, sitting at the front, was Grant Whitford. He looked smaller than he had at the hotel, less polished, his hair less controlled, his suit jacket unbuttoned, as though he'd rushed here or simply didn't have the strength to care. Evelyn sat rigid beside him, spine straight as a ruler, hands clasped around her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. Grant's gaze lifted. Their eyes met. Jalen's heart stumbled. Because in that moment, just a flicker, Grant's expression wasn't anger or fear or disgust. It was guilt. Deep, aching guilt. Pierce touched Jalen's shoulder. Stay focused. The judge is entering. Everyone stood. Judge Miriam Hayes, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, took her seat with an air of quiet command. You may be seated. The room rustled. Pierce leaned down. She's fair, he whispered. But she doesn't like dishonesty. The prosecution began with polished, practiced language. Words like disturbance, endangerment, inappropriate physical contact, unlicensed intervention. They painted a picture, one where Jalen was reckless, seeking attention, crossing invisible lines wealthy people believed defined the world. Jalen listened, hands sweating, throat dry. Every sentence landed like a tiny hammer, reshaping the memory of last night into something ugly. Then it was Pierce's turn. He rose slowly. Your Honor, the boy before you is 14. 14. He is not a criminal mastermind. He is not someone who invaded a private event. He was invited forward. Mockingly, yes, but invited all the same. And the only harm done was to the pride of those who underestimated him. Whispers fluttered through the courtroom. Pierce pressed on. What he did was instinctive, perhaps misplaced, perhaps misguided, but not malicious, and certainly not criminal. Judge Hayes looked toward the seating area where Grant and Evelyn sat. Is Mr. Whitford prepared to testify? She asked. The room collectively held its breath. Evelyn placed a hand on her husband's forearm, squeezing hard, too hard. You don't have to do this, she murmured. Grant hesitated. Something in him cracked under the pressure. He wheeled forward, every rotation of the wheels scraping softly across the courtroom floor. When he reached the witness stand, he braced his hands and lifted himself slightly, enough to shift from the chair into the seat. Gasps filled the room. Even the judge's eyes widened a fraction. Grant adjusted himself slowly before meeting her gaze. Mr. Whitford, Judge Hayes began, please state your involvement in last night's incident. Grant looked down at his hands. When he spoke, his voice was unsteady. The boy didn't attack me. A murmur swept the courtroom like a sudden wind. Evelyn stiffened. Pierce inhaled sharply. Jalen's heart thudded in his chest. Grant continued, voice cracking on the edges. He touched my leg. Yes, but only because I allowed him to. I challenged him. I dared him. And what happened after was unexpected. Unexpected how? The judge asked. Grant swallowed, his shoulders hunched, not physically, but emotionally, as though shedding a heavy truth he'd been carrying for far too long. My foot moved, he said quietly. The room stilled. He repeated it louder. My foot moved, for the first time in 4 years. A hush fell so deep it felt sacred. Evelyn shot to her feet. Grant, what are you— Sit down, the judge said firmly. Evelyn froze, lowering herself slowly, eyes burning with disbelief. Grant's voice trembled, not with fear, but with shame. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want people thinking I'd been lied to by my doctors, or that a child saw something no professional had seen. He looked at Jalen then, really looked at him. Not through the lens of wealth or pity or ego, but through truth. I panicked, he said. Everyone around me panicked, and instead of defending that boy, I stayed quiet. Jalen felt tears sting his eyes, not because Grant had admitted the truth, but because part of him hadn't believed the man ever would. Judge Hayes leaned forward. Mr. Whitford, to be clear, are you saying the defendant's actions caused no harm? Grant nodded. No harm. None. And you do not support charges against him? Another nod, slower, heavy with regret. Correct. The judge turned to the prosecution. Given the testimony from the alleged victim, I see no grounds to move this case forward. Relief washed over Jalen so fast he thought his legs might give out. But just as Pierce exhaled, just as Jalen's heart began to lift, Evelyn stood again. Her voice sliced through the room. Your Honor, my husband doesn't understand the consequences of what he's saying. That boy caused a setback. He caused stress. He caused movement, Grant interrupted sharply. Something your doctors couldn't. Evelyn's face flushed with a panic that looked nothing like fear for her husband's health, and everything like fear of losing control. The judge raised a hand. Mrs. Whitford, unless you intend to speak as a legal witness, please remain seated. Evelyn swallowed her retort. The judge looked at Jalen. Young man, you are dismissed. No charges will be filed. The gavel struck once, a single decisive note, but the moment should have felt victorious. It didn't. Because the look Evelyn shot Jalen as he left the courtroom wasn't relief, wasn't neutrality, wasn't even anger. It was a promise. A cold one. And somewhere behind her composed exterior, she understood exactly what her husband's improvement meant, and how dangerous the truth could become if it ever reached the public. Jalen didn't know her plans, but he knew that look. People didn't fear losing a battle. They feared losing what they built on a lie. And someone like Evelyn Whitford had a lot to lose. When the courthouse doors opened, afternoon sunlight spilled across the steps, but it brought no warmth. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, cameras raised, microphones extended, calling out questions with sharp urgency. Is it true the boy caused a medical setback? Mr. Whitford, did your leg really move? Why was a minor involved in a high-profile donor event? Grant looked dazed under the barrage of voices. His wheelchair rolled unevenly as Evelyn pushed too quickly, too tightly, as though she wished she could erase the last hour with the force of her hands alone. Jalen walked beside his public defender, small and silent, like a shadow in oversized sneakers someone at the youth center had loaned him. Renee Carter kept close, her phone out but lowered, watching everything with a reporter's sharp, distrustful eye. Cameras flashed, shutters clicked. Each flash felt like a strobe light, exposing things the world wasn't supposed to see. Evelyn stopped at the base of the steps. No comments, she snapped. My husband has nothing more to say. A reporter leaned forward. Sir, did the young man harm you? Grant's jaw tightened. His left hand twitched. Not from pain, but from something deeper. He opened his mouth. Evelyn squeezed his shoulder, hard. No further questions, she repeated. Grant's lips closed again. Jalen watched, something inside him sinking like a stone in deep water. Even now, even after the truth had been spoken in a courtroom, Grant still shrank under his wife's pressure, still afraid, still silent. But something else simmered behind Grant's eyes. Something restless. Something awakening. He shifted in his chair, and his left foot moved again, a small but undeniable flex. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Evelyn jerked the wheelchair, blocking their view. Stop filming! But it was too late. Several cameras had caught it. The moment. The truth. The spark. Renee's eyes widened. That's my shot, she whispered. Before she could step forward, a security detail emerged from the courthouse, herding reporters back behind the barricades. Jalen's defender pulled him aside. We need to get you back to the center, son. Let things cool. But as they turned, a voice called out, one Jalen recognized instantly. Jalen! Grant. He reached out an unsteady hand, eyes filled with something raw, regret, longing, maybe even a plea. Jalen hesitated, taking one small step back toward him. Evelyn stepped between them like a shield. You stay away from my husband, she said, voice low and sharp. You've caused enough trouble. Jalen froze. Grant swallowed. Evelyn, we're going home, she ordered. Now! She pushed the wheelchair quickly toward a waiting black SUV. The automatic doors lifted like wings, swallowing them both. The car sped off before anyone else could react. A reporter muttered, That didn't look good. Renee placed a hand gently on Jalen's shoulder. This isn't over, she said. Not even close. But when Jalen returned to the youth center that afternoon, the hope he'd felt in the courtroom began to slip away again. He sat on the edge of his cot, staring at the wall, letting the quiet settle like dust. Every time he blinked, he saw Grant's face at the courthouse, wanting to speak, wanting to reach out, and failing. He couldn't blame him. Adults were different. They had more to lose. They could drown in their own fear. But Jalen had no such luxury. That evening, he heard staff members murmuring near the doorway. "The Whitford legal team wants a statement," one said. "They're pushing a narrative that the boy caused a psychological episode." "Is that even true?" another asked. "It doesn't matter if it's true," the first replied. "It matters who's saying it." Pressure, manipulation, spin. This was a war being fought in conversations he wasn't invited to. Jalen climbed under the blanket, hugging his knees. He wondered if Maya had eaten dinner. He wondered if she was scared. He wondered if she knew he hadn't forgotten her. He wondered what Grant was doing at that moment. Miles away, the Whitford penthouse glowed softly against the night. The city skyline stretched outside the tall windows, reflections shimmering across glass tabletops and marble floors. Grant stood alone in his bedroom, stood without the wheelchair. His hand trembled on the dresser as he tested his weight. His left leg quivered, struggling, but holding just enough to make his breath catch. He lifted his foot, only an inch. But he lifted it, and the shock of it shook him to his core. He lowered himself back into the chair when he heard footsteps approaching. Evelyn entered, expression tight but composed. "I talked with the attorneys," she said. "Tomorrow, we release a statement. The boy caused emotional distress. We'll frame it as an unfortunate misunderstanding." Grant stared down. "He didn't cause distress." "He humiliated you," she corrected sharply. "In a room full of donors. We can't allow this to spiral out of control." "It's already spiraling," he whispered. "Then we take back the narrative." Grant's voice was barely audible. "He helped me." Evelyn froze. "Excuse me?" "He helped me," Grant repeated. "I felt something. Movement. Real movement. You saw it." Evelyn's jaw clenched. "I saw panic. I saw shock. I saw an unstable moment exploited by a child who should never have been there." Grant looked up at her, eyes tired, defeated. "Why are you so afraid of the truth?" Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Finally, Evelyn stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Because if people believe that boy helped you, then everything we've been told is wrong. Everything we've invested in, every doctor, every treatment, every fundraiser, every media appearance, it all becomes a joke." She leaned in. "Do you want to be the punchline?" Grant didn't answer. She continued, colder now. "You will say what needs to be said, and this will go away." She turned off the bedroom lights as she left, plunging him into shadow. Grant sat alone, leg twitching softly beneath the blanket. He'd spent years trapped in a body that wouldn't move, and now found himself trapped in a life he couldn't control. And in a quiet room miles away, Jalen Brooks wiped tears from his eyes, wishing he could forget the ballroom, the courtroom, the fear. But some truths, once awakened, refused to sleep again. Some hurts, once recognized, refused to be ignored. And some destinies, once touched, refused to let go. Tomorrow would not be quiet. Not for Jalen, not for Grant, not for the lie that was beginning to crack open for the whole world to see. The next morning rose slow and gray, the kind of sky that made everything feel heavier. Mist clung to the courthouse steps as people gathered earlier than usual. Reporters, spectators, curious onlookers who had watched last night's shaky phone videos of a millionaire's foot moving in a way it supposedly hadn't in years. It didn't matter that opinions were divided. It didn't matter that the official story called it a spasm. People had seen something real, and now the city was holding its breath. Inside the courthouse, the air was cold enough to make Jalen rub his hands together. The youth center director sat behind him, stiff-backed, unsure whether she was here to support the boy or just to fulfill a legal obligation. Jalen sat quietly, feet not touching the floor, heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat. He didn't understand all the laws being thrown around, but he understood fear, and today the room was full of it. Grant entered last, but not in a wheelchair. Heads turned as he stepped through the double doors, slowly, carefully, but undeniably on his own strength. His body trembled with each step, his hand gripping a cane so tightly his knuckles were white. But his left foot, a foot that had betrayed him for nearly half a decade, moved in rhythm with the right. A whisper spread like wind through dry grass. That's him. He's walking. Is that real? Evelyn walked beside him, her smile tight, her fingers digging into his arm as if she could will him back into the chair through sheer force. Behind them, Dr. Alan Mercer carried a briefcase and an expression like carved stone. But Grant didn't look at them. He didn't look at the cameras. He looked at Jalen. For a heartbeat, everything else vanished. The judge entered, calling the room to order. We are here to address the allegations against Jalen Brooks and determine whether this case proceeds. The court calls Grant Whitford to the stand. Grant exhaled, slow, steady, practicing courage, the kind of courage money couldn't buy. As he reached the witness box, his right leg wobbled, and he grabbed the rail to steady himself. A reporter gasped softly. Evelyn stiffened. Dr. Mercer's jaw twitched. Grant raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, then sank into the chair beside the judge's bench. Mr. Whitford, the judge began, you previously signed statements asserting that the boy, Jalen Brooks, caused you emotional and physical harm. Is that correct? Evelyn's eyes narrowed in warning. Grant swallowed hard. The courtroom waited. Yes, he said. And do you stand by those statements today? The question hung in the air, heavy, trembling. Grant closed his eyes. His voice broke on the first word. No. Gasps rippled through the gallery. No, Grant repeated, louder this time. I do not stand by them. They weren't true. Evelyn reached for his arm. Grant, he pulled away. They weren't true, he said again, firmer. Not one word of them. The judge leaned forward. Then what is the truth, Mr. Whitford? Grant turned toward Jalen. His voice shook, but the words were clear. The truth is, that boy saved me. A wave of shock passed through the room. The prosecutor dropped his pen. Someone in the back whispered, I knew it. Grant continued, my doctors told me recovery was impossible. 4 years of treatments, surgeries, therapy, no progress. I lived in that chair. I accepted it. I accepted everything they said because they were the ones with degrees, with awards, with answers. He paused, emotion swelling. But that night, at the Riverside Grand Hotel, something changed. That boy put his hands on my leg, and for the first time in years, I felt movement. Not a spasm, not a fluke. Movement I could control. Evelyn stood abruptly. Grant, stop it! You don't understand what you're saying! The judge banged her gavel. Sit down, Mrs. Whitford, or you will be removed. Evelyn sank back into her seat, trembling with fury. Grant cleared his throat. I lied because I was scared, because people around me insisted it was impossible, because admitting that a 14-year-old boy from the streets saw what trained specialists missed would embarrass them, would embarrass me. He looked directly at Dr. Mercer. And because some people here cared more about protecting reputations than protecting truth. Dr. Mercer stiffened. His voice, when he spoke, was icy. Mr. Whitford, you're confused. You experienced an involuntary response. No, Grant cut in. Don't tell me what I felt. Don't speak over my truth. Mercer faltered for the first time. Grant turned back to the judge. Every day since that night, my leg has improved. Quietly, slowly, privately. I hid it because I was ashamed of how easily I believed lies over my own body. He looked at Jalen again, and his voice softened. He didn't harm me. He didn't mislead me. He didn't ask for anything. He helped because he saw pain and wanted to ease it. That's more humanity than I showed him in return. The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully. So you are withdrawing all accusations? Yes, Grant said. Every single one. And the claim that the boy performed an unsolicited medical procedure? Grant shook his head. He didn't touch me without permission. I dared him. I mocked him. I humiliated him. And he helped me anyway. The room broke into murmurs again. Grant took a breath, then spoke the words that split the world in two. And I stand by the offer I made. $1 million. He earned it. Jalen gasped softly. His hands flew to his mouth. The room erupted into chaos. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Evelyn screamed something unintelligible. Mercer muttered under his breath, face pale as chalk. But the judge raised her gavel. Order returned, slowly, uneasily, but it returned. The judge turned to Jalen. Young man, do you have a response? Jalen stood, knees shaking. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. I don't want the money. The courtroom froze. Grant blinked in shock. You don't? Jalen shook his head. If I take it, this becomes about money. That's not why I helped you. My grandma taught me that healing, real healing, isn't something you sell. Tears brimmed in Grant's eyes. The judge waited. Then what do you want, Jalen? Jalen swallowed hard. I want you to help kids like me, kids nobody sees, kids who have something special but don't get chances because of where they come from. The room softened. Even the prosecutor lowered his gaze. I want you, Jalen said quietly, to make sure my grandma's belief that knowledge can come from anywhere isn't forgotten. Grant covered his face. His shoulders shook. When he looked up, he nodded through tears. I'll do it. Anything. Just tell me how. Jalen took a deep breath and offered a future bigger than money, bigger than pain, bigger than fear. The courtroom didn't know it yet, but history had just shifted. All because a poor black boy refused to stop telling the truth, even when the whole world tried to bury it. The courthouse emptied slow that afternoon, like people weren't quite sure how to walk back into their regular lives after watching something shift so loudly in front of them. Outside, the sky had cleared, blue and soft, like the city itself was exhaling. But inside the hallway, where the echoes of judgment still clung to the walls, Jalen Brooks stood in a stillness that didn't feel real. He kept waiting for someone to undo it, tell him he misheard, tell him the truth Grant spoke was just another trick. But then Grant stepped out of the courtroom, no wheelchair behind him, moving carefully but upright, supported only by a cane and the trembling courage of a man trying to start over. He walked straight to Jalen, not to the cameras, not to his lawyers, not to Dr. Mercer or Evelyn, who stood in the corner frozen with disbelief. Straight to Jalen, the millionaire who had mocked him, now met him eye to eye. Son, Grant said softly, voice thick, I owe you more than money, more than apologies. I owe you my life back. People around them pretended not to stare, but everyone watched. Security guards, reporters, courthouse staff, even passers-by who slowed just enough to listen. You couldn't help it. Something about the two of them, the smallest kid in the hall and the wealthiest man, felt like a moment you didn't get every day. Grant clasped his cane with both hands. But I meant what I said in there. If you want that $1 million, It's yours. Jalen swallowed hard. His sneakers were worn thin, his hoodie faded, the same clothes he'd worn the night he was arrested. He thought of his sister. He thought of rent they'd never been able to afford. He thought of nights sleeping behind the laundromat when the shelters were full. $1 million could fix every problem he had ever known, but something in him, a voice soft but firm, the one Grandma always said carried the better part of his soul, wouldn't let him reach for it. "I don't want your money," Jalen said again, steadier this time. "I want something else." Grant blinked. "Anything." The hallway went quiet as Jalen took a breath. "I want a fund," he said. "A fund for kids like me. Kids who get looked at like they're trouble before anyone knows who they really are. Kids who've got something special, but no one sees it." Grant stared at him, eyes glistening. Reporters raised their cameras again, sensing something important. "A fund?" Grant echoed. "You mean a charity?" "No," Jalen said. "A promise." That word seemed to change the air. "I want you to build a place," Jalen continued, "where kids can learn, where they're safe, where they're believed. A place where nobody gets thrown away. Name it after someone who mattered. Name it after my grandma, but call it for every kid who never gets a chance." Grant's lips parted. Shock, grief, admiration blending together. "What would we call it?" he whispered. "Brooks Legacy Fund," Jalen said quietly, "for kids who deserve better than the world gave them." A tear fell down Grant's cheek before he could stop it. Behind him, Evelyn let out a soft, strangled sound, part disbelief, part heartbreak, because she had just learned something she never understood. Power wasn't the ability to take what you wanted. It was the ability to give without asking anything back. Grant nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, then that's what we'll build." Jalen felt something loosen in his chest, something tight and painful he'd carried so long, he'd forgotten its weight. He didn't smile, not yet. But his shoulders dropped in quiet relief. Grant reached out a trembling hand. Jalen hesitated, just for a second, then placed his small hand in Grant's. The crowd didn't clap. They didn't cheer. They didn't need to. The handshake itself was enough. Later, as the sun dipped low and the courthouse steps glowed gold, more cameras gathered, microphones gathered, news vans gathered. The story was too big now for the city to ignore, and Grant stepped up to the podium with Jalen beside him, not behind him. "Today," Grant said, "I withdraw every accusation, and today, I begin repairing my part in breaking this boy's life." He turned to Jalen. "Tell them what you want." Jalen moved to the microphone. The crowd leaned in. "I don't need money," he said. "I need this world to stop wasting kids who could change it." The applause that followed was soft at first, then louder, then rolling like a wave. Cameras flashed. Voices rose. People called Jalen's name. And through it all, Grant leaned down and whispered, "I'm proud of you, son." It wasn't until Jalen heard that word, son, that his eyes stung with tears he refused to let fall. Later that evening, in a small rented community hall filled with flashes of press badges and half-finished coffees, Grant made another announcement. "We launch the Brooks Legacy Fund next month," he said. "Full initial funding from me. And Jalen Brooks will serve as our first youth advisory leader." Gasps filled the room. Jalen's knees nearly buckled. But Grant wasn't done. "And tomorrow morning, the city will hear from me again, because tonight was not the end of the truth." The crowd murmured in curiosity. Jalen watched him, confused, but something in Grant's voice told him the next revelation wasn't about charity. It was about what had nearly destroyed them both. The things people had done behind boardroom doors. The lies that had buried more than just legs and hope. the truth someone tried desperately to bury. Grant looked at Jalen then, really looked, and nodded as if asking permission. Jalen nodded back, quietly. And Grant Whitford knew. Tomorrow, the world would learn everything. Because the boy he once mocked had just become the one person he couldn't lie in front of. And that changed everything. The next morning broke bright and sharp, the kind of sunlight that makes a city look cleaner than it really is. Downtown shimmered with glass towers and polished stone, but beneath the shine, tension moved like a quiet current. People knew something big was coming. Last night's footage had already circled the internet. Grant Whitford standing on his own 2 feet, speaking words no one expected from a man who once measured life by the size of a check. Today, he had promised answers. All of them. The press conference was held in a mid-sized community auditorium, not the gilded corporate stage Grant usually favored, but a simpler place with folding chairs, scuffed wooden floors, and a mural painted by neighborhood kids. It felt fitting, almost symbolic, like he was stepping out of his old world into a new one. Grant stood behind the podium with a steadiness that came from more than his recovering muscles. Jalen stood beside him, dressed in a borrowed collared shirt that hung a little loose on his small shoulders. His hair was brushed, face clean, but his eyes, those stayed the same. Clear, steady, soft with the weight of everything he'd lived through. Cameras clicked. Reporters murmured. The whole city seemed to hold its breath. Grant glanced at Jalen, then faced the crowd. "Thank you all for coming. I have a statement today. One I should have given years ago. Not because I was forced to, but because truth shouldn't need a courtroom to breathe." He paused, letting the silence settle. 4 years ago, I was injured. And for 4 years, I believed everything I was told. About my body. I believed I was finished. I believed recovery was impossible. And I believed the only thing left for me was to pay people to give me hope I would never actually receive. A stir swept through the crowd. Grant continued, voice low and steady. "But I've learned something these last few weeks. Not about medicine. Not about science. About honesty. About the cost of being silent when the truth would set someone else free." He tightened his grip on the podium. "I am here today to tell you that my medical team, led by Dr. Alan Mercer, misdiagnosed me for years. They overlooked critical factors. They dismissed progress. They kept me comfortable in the lie that their approach was the only approach. And when that lie cracked, they worked very hard to bury the pieces." Flashes erupted across the room. Grant didn't look shaken. He looked relieved. "But the biggest mistake I made," Grant said softly, "was believing them over a boy who saw me, really saw me, in ways no one else ever had." He nodded toward Jalen. "This young man brought movement back into my leg when every expert said it was impossible. He saw the injury, the way his grandmother taught him. Through instinct. Through generations of understanding the body in ways that don't come from textbooks, but from lived experience." Jalen lowered his gaze, overwhelmed, and I let him be treated like a criminal for it. A hush fell. Even the cameras seemed to quiet. I let him be arrested. I let his name be dragged in the press. I let him sit in a youth center alone while I hid the truth in my mansion. Grant's voice cracked. "I betrayed the very person who helped me stand again." Jalen looked up then. Not angry, just listening. Grant continued, "I can't undo what happened, but I can refuse to stay silent now." He stepped aside slightly and gestured to Jalen. "Before I finish, I want you all to hear from the person who rebuilt my life." Reporters angled forward, microphones extended like reaching hands. Jalen stepped up to the podium, his fingers brushing the edge of it as if grounding himself. He scanned the room, eyes full of hurt that hadn't yet healed, but also something stronger. My grandma used to tell me, he began quietly, that some people see the world in pieces, but some people see how the pieces fit. He swallowed. I don't know a lot about fancy words or big medical stuff. I just know what I feel under my hands. I know when someone's hurting. And that night, Mr. Whitford was hurting. A soft murmur rolled through the room. I didn't help him for money, Jalen said. I didn't help him because he was rich. I helped him because nobody else was seeing the pain right in front of them. He paused, his voice trembling but strong. You all talk about miracles like they're magic. But healing doesn't come from magic. It comes from someone finally listening, finally believing, finally giving somebody a chance. One reporter raised a hand. And what do you want now, Jalen? He didn't miss a beat. I want every kid who's ever been ignored, or called trouble, or made to feel small, to have a place where people listen to them, where they're not thrown away, where their gifts don't die just because nobody bothered to look. Grant wiped at his eyes. He wasn't alone. Jalen stepped back. Grant returned to the podium for one last statement. Today, I am officially launching the Brooks Legacy Fund, named after Jalen's family. It will offer scholarships, mentorship, health access, and educational support to kids who've been overlooked. We're starting chapters in 3 neighborhoods immediately. And Jalen Brooks, Grant smiled, genuine, humbled, will serve as our youngest honorary advisor. His insight saved me. I think he can save a whole lot more. The applause that rose wasn't polite. It wasn't staged. It was real. People stood. People cried. People clapped like they were witnessing something larger than 2 individuals. Like they were witnessing a shift in the world. Afterward, the lobby filled with reporters, volunteers, community leaders, and curious locals. But Jalen slipped outside quietly, stepping into the afternoon sun, where the world felt both too big and finally wide open. Grant found him sitting on the stone steps, watching pigeons flap in the plaza. You okay? Grant asked, lowering himself beside the boy with careful, deliberate steps. Jalen shrugged. Feels weird. Good weird, but still weird. Grant chuckled softly. Most important things do. They sat in silence for a moment, letting the city breathe around them. You changed my life, Grant said after a while, and now, I hope we can change a few more together. Jalen looked out across the plaza. Kids laughing near a fountain, a woman feeding crumbs to birds, a busker playing guitar under a shade tree. Ordinary life. But for the first time, he felt part of it. Maybe more than a few, he whispered. Grant nodded. As many as it takes. And in that moment, 2 people who came from worlds so far apart they shouldn't have ever crossed, shared the same truth. Healing doesn't just fix bodies. It fixes the spaces between people. It fixes the stories we tell about who matters. Later that week, at the fund's launch event in a renovated community center, Grant stepped onto the stage without his cane. The crowd erupted. Jalen watched from the front row, pride warming his chest. The lights glowed soft. The air buzzed with possibility. Grant raised the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, voice steady and hopeful, please welcome the spirit and reason behind everything we've built here. Jalen Brooks. The applause rolled through the room like thunder. Jalen walked up, heart pounding but steady. He looked out at the faces, young, old, all colors, all stories, and he spoke the words he wished someone had spoken to him long ago. Don't let anybody tell you your life doesn't matter. Don't let them say you're too small to make a difference. Don't let the world bury what you know. Because sometimes, the world needs exactly what you've been carrying all along. The crowd rose as one, standing, cheering, believing. And Jalen Brooks, barefoot no longer, unseen no longer, finally felt the truth his grandmother had whispered years ago. Some truths aren't meant to stay hidden. Some gifts aren't meant to be quiet. And some boys aren't meant to disappear into the shadows. They were meant to change the world. And now he finally believed he could. If this story touched your heart even a little, drop a simple 1 in the comments so I know you're here with me. And if you want more stories of courage, kindness, and unexpected miracles, make sure you're subscribed. Your one comment or one click keeps these stories alive, and I can't wait to share the next one with you.